Here they come, Tyler, walking down the street.
The music of my childhood.
You're not that old.
Hey.
So today we're going to do the Monkees and their first hit song, Last Train to Clarksville. Let me give you a little history on the band The Monkees first. They're an American rock pop band, whatever you want to call them, formed in Los Angeles, California in 1965. Funny thing about this band is they were actually created as a fictional band for a TV series. Of course, that TV series was called The Monkees. The band and show consisted of Mickey Dolenz, Davy Jones, Michael Nesmith, and Peter Tork. All band members were musicians and somewhat of actors.
And they were pretty good, actually.
Not too bad at all.
Not too bad at all. These guys, they became a real band. People bought their albums.
Yeah, and what's kind of funny about that is they had to change it around a little. Mickey Dolenz actually ended up playing the drums in the TV show, but he was the one with the least experience playing drums. Davy Jones had the most experience and was the most capable of playing drums, but since he was so short, the director...
He was adorable and little.
Well, the director didn't like the way he looked sitting behind the drums, so they put Mickey on the drums, but Mickey was a guitarist. So the sitcom, The Monkees, lasted for 2 seasons from 1966 to 1968, and where they were originally a fictional band, their early recording contributions, they were limited to vocals and backing vocals from the group, but most of the song compositions were provided by professional songwriters and musicians. But after the popularity of the show grew, the Monkees soon revolted and gained full control over the recording process in 1967 and actually became a real band. So the show, The Monkees, was actually inspired by a movie we know really well, The Beatles' A Hard Day's Night.
It was a hard day's night.
Yeah, so that's kind of what this was all created off of.
So this was an American answer to A Hard Day's Night?
Somewhat, because this show was actually looked at clear back in 62, they kind of had something to do with this, but I think this was kind of the answer or the American answer to the Beatles in a way.
Yeah, the British invasion, but specifically the Beatles.
Yes, and the one thing is I'm glad they did this. This would be something I would probably balk at normally, but something somehow functioned correctly, And I mean, there's a lot of groups that didn't write their own songs or even perform them, and this is one of them, at least early on, and there's some good hits written in here that they did well, including the one we're doing today.
See, that's how awesome the Beatles are as a band, is even their parody offshoot or inspiration TV show became a hit and started writing their own songs and became a real successful band as a result.
So once the show became very successful and they kind of gained control of their recordings and everything, they actually started touring as a band. It's kind of interesting thing about them is they actually gave the Jimi Hendrix Experience their first U.S. concert tour exposure. So Jimi Hendrix Experience was opening for the Monkees. That was their first tour in America. It was really interesting with them going through all the music. A lot of the music was written for them by professionals. They've sang songs written by Neil Diamond, but then they've done a lot their own as well. And so it's really interesting contribution from this band. And, after 20 years, 1986, on the 20th anniversary, there was a reignition of interest in the band, and that really spurred a lot of things. The TV series kind of got put back on the air. They had a reunion, got back together, made an album and things like that. There's been several reunions in the 90s and 2000s. And of course, Davy Jones was the first Monkee to die of a heart attack in 2012.
Poor little guy.
Peter Tork died of cancer in 2019.
Somewhat taller.
Yeah, somewhat taller. And Michael Nesmith died of heart failure in 2021, leaving Mickey Dolenz as the sole Monkee.
Is Mickey the tallest of them?
I think so, yeah.
So it sounds like they're kicking off in order of height, shortest to tallest.
That could be the case, yeah. It's hard to say, but that could be the case. So all in all, the band sold over 80 million albums worldwide, which isn't too shabby.
Yeah.
They've released 14 studio albums, 11 live albums, and grasp this, 39 compilation albums. We've kind of joked about that before when bands have 2-3 times as many compilation albums as actually had albums, but that definitely is the case here.
What surprises me about these statistics is we've reviewed other bands that didn't have nearly that many sales as the Monkees. This is impressive.
The Monkees were a big band.
Yeah.
I mean, no doubt about it. I mean, regardless of what you think of them writing some of their own music or not writing some of their own music, and we'll kind of get into a little of that, but they were popular and they were the faces of it.
Yeah.
In the sitcom, in the band, everything. And it was their voices, and that's no different than what you hear from a lot of bands and singers nowadays. A lot of them aren't writing their own music. A lot of them aren't playing their own music. They're just singing a song that they got from a professional songwriter. So it's really no different here, other than that kind of changed as they gained popularity and they started writing their own music, playing all their own instruments and things like that. But out of their studio albums, the first 4 studio albums they released hit number 1 in the U.S., and that's a pretty big feat. The first 3 hit number 1 in Canada, and the 4th one only hit number 2 in Canada, so pretty close. And then the first 2 hit number 1 in the UK, and then number 2 and number 5 for the other ones. So that's pretty good roundup for their first 4 albums. Yeah, so all in all, 6 albums in the top 20 in the US and 8 in the top 50. That's not bad out of 14 studio albums. They've released a total of 26 singles. They had 3 number 1 hits in the US. The one we're doing today, Last Train to Clarksville, I'm a Believer, and Daydream Believer, all hit number 1. They had 6 number 1 hits in Canada, so double the number 1 hits in Canada that they did in the US. So I won't go through them all. But they
Pleasant Valley Sunday.
And that was one of them.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I just pulled that out of my...
And they just had 1 number 1 in the UK, which was I'm a Believer, but they did have a few others that were up there, obviously. So
It really is a good song, I'm a Believer. I remember that one from the Wonder Years.
So in the U.S., as far as their singles are concerned, 8 of the 26 singles they released reached the top 20, 11 of them in the top 50, 13 of them reached the top 50 in Canada, and 10 in the top 50 in the U.K. And one thing that's really interesting about this band, too, is there's a debate going on about whether this is a band that should make the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or not. And if you've listened to this podcast, you know what I think of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but I think it's kind of a joke. And I think one of the bigger jokes is all these bands that they eventually end up letting in, they know they're going to let them in, but they wait until all the members are dead and then they let them in. You know, if you're going to let them in, let the sons of bitches in from the beginning and
for real. It's just cheeky. You know what I think, Justin? We need to start our own Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
We could try.
Because, I mean, these guys obviously don't get it, and we do.
Well, and speaking on that with the Monkees, 4 straight number 1 hit albums. If that doesn't qualify you for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I don't give a shit who wrote the songs. I know who was the face of the songs and who sang the songs.
Not to mention that's right out of the gates. I mean, these guys, they throw the gate open and they ride that bull to stardom.
Exactly. And if we talk about bands that were put together, let's throw Led Zeppelin in that mix. They were put together of a bunch of studio musicians, so it's really no different other than Led Zeppelin pretty much wrote a lot of their own music to begin with, along with all the music they ripped off.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, I'm a huge Led Zeppelin fan, so don't take that as a punch. So do you want to get to the song review?
I do.
And now it's time for the song review.
Okay, Tyler, so today we're doing the Monkees and their first hit single, Last Train to Clarksville. Why don't you tell me what your history is with this song first?
Radio play, for the most part. I probably, in my young childhood, would have heard this song on the TV series as they played the reruns. My sisters were big fans of watching the Monkees. They thought it was silly, and I thought it was silly because, hey, it was kind of silly. But these guys were very much like the parody version of the Beatles.
I think they were the parody version of the Beatles in Hard Day's Night in a way. And I mean, like I said earlier, that was kind of what it was created off of, but in a different way. It's a goofy show, and I was watching it the other day, funny enough, and it's a pretty good show.
Well, the opening credits played out very much like the opening credits in A Hard Day's Night, is you have the band being chased around by fans, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, yeah, it's very much reminiscent of it, and that's probably the whole parody thing. But yeah, these guys, they stood on their own 8 feet, I guess.
Yeah, monkeys only usually have 2 feet, but these monkeys had 8 feet.
Yeah, and then they also had 8 hands. But Davy Jones is like 3 feet tall, so
true. So I've known this song forever. I've liked the Monkees since I was in high school, so I've been into the Monkees for 35 plus years or whatever from before I was in high school. I watched the series back then when it kind of had when it got popular again in the late 80s, early 90s. And
since the Ford administration.
Well, not quite that far back, but yeah, close. But let's get into a little bit of information on the song Last Train to Clarksville. So this song was written by a duo called Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart. Now, the duo of Boyce and Hart, they've written many famous songs. I'm not going to go into name them, but a lot of bands they've written songs for, like Jay and the Americans, Paul Revere and the Raiders, and of course the Monkees, as we're going on right now. This single was released on August 16th of 1966. It was the band's single debut, and it was actually just released a few weeks before the premiere of the TV series. The B-side of this song was a song called Take a Giant Step. It was recorded at RCA Studios in Hollywood, California, and it was produced by Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart, the songwriters. The song charted number 1 in the U.S. and Canada. It only hit number 23 in the U.K., but still pretty decent for a debut single. Of course, once again, you've got the Monkees on this as Mickey Dolenz on vocals, Peter Tork, and Davy Jones on backing vocals. That's the only input you have from the Monkees on this song. You've got Tommy Boyce, Louis Shelton, Wayne Irwin, and Jerry McGee on guitars, Larry Taylor on bass, Billy Lewis on drums, and these guys were all Boyce and Hart's band. It was a band called the Candy Store Prophets. So this is basically the Monkees singing with a backing band.
Nice.
But we've seen that with other bands when, a good example is the Beach Boys when, they had a bunch of backing musicians in. And it's really no different than when you go in and put orchestration to a song and it's a bunch of guys in there. So same type of thing, but you're hearing the Monkees, you're hearing Mickey Dolenz as the lead vocal on this. This song was actually featured in 7 separate episodes of the Monkey TV series, and Boyce, one of the songwriters, has said the opening of the song was meant to emulate a Beatles riff, and he more importantly pointed to like Day Tripper, I Feel Fine, Paperback Writer, and many others that he thought he wanted this to be similar to, and I think they kind of hit that.
I think so, which would explain its instant hit.
I think it's pretty easy to understand the meaning of this song. I mean, it's not too hard to figure out. It's about a man calling a woman who he loves. He calls her on the phone. He is urging her to meet him at the train station as soon as possible because he's leaving, and he possibly could be leaving forever. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that has anything to do with going off to war. I mean, you make of it what you will, but he's leaving somewhere forever. And thinking this is 66, mid 66, that could be war that they're kind of...
A war in Southeast Asia?
Something.
Yeah.
Who knows? But after hearing Last Train to Clarksville, Tyler, that you've obviously heard before, what are your thoughts on this song?
It's fun to listen to songs I've heard before because for this podcast, we listen to critique and to review. And so it makes me actively listen in a way that's more intense than just casually listening to the radio.
You know what's funny about that is you kind of hit it on the head when you say that, because there's a lot of these songs I've listened to hundreds, if not thousands of times. But when you sit down here with a paper to write down, what am I hearing here? What do I think? I'm not sure if that's a better way to listen to music or not, because sometimes listening to music is all just about the feel, not about thinking too hard into it. So
true. It
does give you a different outlook on it.
And I can see why this song became an instant hit. It totally has that Beatles intro to it. It opens with a guitar and a tambourine of all things. And I love the tambourine in this song. Usually I look at the tambourine as kind of like, okay, that's what you give to, the drummer's girlfriend just to, let her feel included. Just let her, bop the tambourine. No, the tambourine actually contributes in this song. And the whole instrumentation really sounds like it's supposed to, and it does sound like a train. That feeling, it starts off and then it jumps into the lyrics, take the last train to Clarksville and I'll meet you at the station. So he's trying to arrange for a meeting with his girlfriend. He's going away. He doesn't know if he's ever going to see her again, but this is a chance for him to get together and do a little canoodling for the last time. Maybe for the last time. Who knows? I was amazed by how many different sounds there are with all these instruments, and yet I can only really pick out a few. There was the bass, the drums, the guitars, the tambourine. I don't know if there was more than that, but it sounded like that every time I'd listened to this before, it sounded like, oh, there's got to be a lot of, extra instrumentation, some piano, some, strings or horns or something. And no, it seemed pretty straightforward. One thing I did notice, it's a song of repetitive chorus. I wouldn't necessarily normally like that, but it really fits. There's a lot of repetition because, in every verse he keeps starting with the same intro of take the last train to Clarksville, and then it ends with that. And the repetition, train rides are they have that repetitive rhythm, it gets kind of monotonous. Everything sounds that way. I guess it sounds like he's doing this all on a phone call, and there's so much noise going on in the background. I'm really concerned if he even knows if he's talking to her at all. He might just have a dead line there. His dime ran out, and she didn't even get any of this information.
Yeah, you don't hear anything from her, do you?
No, he doesn't wait for a response, and he might just end up really disappointed. Like, oh, man, she never got the message. So those were the thoughts that I had jotted down. What are your thoughts here, Justin?
I like Last Train to Clarksville. I've always been a pretty big Monkees fan, funny enough. And if you really dive into their albums, they've got some pretty good stuff in there, some hidden gems. And most of their popular songs are decent, too. I'm not a big fan of Daydream Believer. In fact, I'm not a huge fan of most of the stuff Davy Jones sings. And that's one thing I'll start off with this, is I really like Mickey Dolenz and his vocals. I think his vocal fits perfect. So everything he sings from the Monkees, I've always just really enjoyed. And like you said, it's got a good opening riff, and then the tambourine kicks in. It's got good, decent bass. I think the drumming is a little tinny, which is very, very common of the time, but it seems a little tinny. That could be thickened up, and maybe it is in some of the newer mixes. I'm not sure. I do like the harmonies between the Monkees and the verses. I think they harmonize really well. All of them are good singers. The guitar throughout really reminds me of the Byrds, the Beatles, things like that. It's just spot on British Invasion style guitar. It just sounds really good. And the song closes out, just saying take the last train to Clarksville. I think it says it like 4 times in a row, and it's got some really good harmonies with that. It's a pretty simple song. It's pretty easy to figure out what it's about from the lyrics. The music isn't complicated or anything like that, but this was a huge hit, for a so-called fake band to be made up for a TV series, and then to go in and sing this song, and it hit number 1 as their debut singles. Pretty neat, honestly, and pretty impressive. So, yeah, really good song.
I do have a quick question for you. There's a sound in this song that's repetitive, and it sounds like a pressure relief valve letting off some steam, and it just keeps going tss, tss. Is that like a cymbal, or is it a human's voice?
It's funny you say that, because I heard it as well, and I'm not sure. We'll have to do some research and see what it is, because I am not sure.
Yeah, because it's in there, and I mean, it could just it does.
Maybe it's just a cymbal.
Sounds just like tss, tss, and it could be the cymbal.
Maybe it's just a cymbal on the drum kit, and maybe it's just the way it's mixed, because, like I said, all the drums are kind of tinny and far away sounding, and so maybe that's what you're getting. I'm not really sure on that. Do you want to get to the song rating?
Yeah, and before we do, I need to apologize to the listeners for hissing into the microphone.
That's okay.
Song rating.
Okay, so if this is your first time listening, we have a pretty simple scale, 0 to 10, 0 being terrible, 10 being amazing. This song, I put it at a 6, and I feel like I put it at a 6. It's a little low after talking about it. I would probably bump it up a point or 2 now, but it plays out like a cheap version of a much better Beatles song. I was going to say that even Cream's White Room, but I don't know that that's much of a better song than this one. I think that this one is pretty decent, and I don't want to say too many horrible.
What is the similarity you're striking with Cream's
White Room? Because they don't both take place in a train station or a station.
Oh, I'm with you.
Yeah.
So you're just talking about the subject matter, not the actual music.
Mm-hmm. Or the whole Beatles movie, A Hard Day's Night.
Yeah.
Because most or half of that movie takes place on a train or in a train station.
Yes, it does.
So that's where I put it at a 6. I'm gonna stick to that. Although I do want to bump it, I'm not going to. Where do you put it?
Yeah, we're pretty close on this. I don't think it's anything special, but this song does make me reminisce. The Monkees make me reminisce, and I like diving into the band's albums. I think they're really good. They've got a kind of neat movie out there that you ought to go see too. But they're an interesting band, and I give this song a 7. I think it's perfect for its time, perfect for what it did. It obviously hit number 1 and enchanted everyone, just like the TV series did, and 4 straight number 1 albums in a row. How many bands can say they've done that?
That in and of itself, that little fact deserves to bump it up to a 7. You're right. I'm wrong on this one.
But either way, I mean, neither of us know what we're talking about. So
Yeah.
it's just based on what we're hearing in our ears and what we think. And we're not qualified, but that means we don't speak our mind on it. So, but if you have any questions, comments, concerns, let us know what you think. Send them to classicvinylpodcast@gmail.com. And we really appreciate you listening, like always. And until next time,
See ya.
see you later.
Thank you so much for listening to Classic Vinyl Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at Classic Vinyl Podcast for updates, and also share us with your music-loving friends.